The death of John Wycliffe in 1384, a transformative moment in ecclesiastical history. John Wycliffe, frequently heralded as the morning star of the Reformation, occupies a seminal position in the historiography of Christianity. His death in 1384 did not merely mark the conclusion of a life defined by intellectual rigor and theological dissent, it encapsulated a pivotal juncture in the protracted struggle over ecclesiastical authority, biblical accessibility, and the moral underpinnings of Christian governance. Wycliffe's theological innovations, trenchant critiques of clerical corruption, and advocacy for vernacular scripture sowed seeds of reform that would germinate in subsequent centuries, culminating in the Protestant Reformation. Let's comprehensively analyze Wycliffe's intellectual trajectory, his doctrinal contributions, and the enduring legacy of his radical vision for Christian praxis. Intellectual formation within a context of turmoil. Born circa 1320 in the Yorkshire village of Hipswell, John Wycliffe came of age within a milieu characterized by profound socio-political upheaval and ecclesiastical hegemony. Oxford University, where he commenced his intellectual journey, was a nexus of scholastic inquiry and dialectical debate. Wycliffe's precocious aptitude for philosophy and theology earned him the distinction of Master of Balliol College and subsequently a doctorate in divinity, securing his place among the preeminent intellectuals of 14th-century England. Oxford's scholastic tradition, rooted in the works of Augustine, Aquinas, and Aristotle, profoundly influenced Wycliffe's approach to theology. Yet, his exegetical and philosophical rigor often led him to conclusions that diverged sharply from prevailing ecclesiastical interpretations. Central to Wycliffe's intellectual orientation was a radical reappraisal of scriptural primacy over ecclesiastical dogma, an assertion that placed him in direct conflict with the hierarchical structures of the medieval church. The broader socio-political context of Wycliffe's formative years cannot be understated. The 14th century witnessed recurring plague pandemics, most notably the Black Death, which decimated populations and eroded the Church's perceived moral authority. Concurrently, events such as the Peasants' Revolt of 1381 illuminated the fissures within feudal hierarchies, exposing systemic inequities that resonated with Wycliffe's calls for ecclesiastical and societal reform. Doctrinal innovations and ecclesiastical critique. Wycliffe's theological oeuvre is characterized by an unwavering commitment to the authority of Scripture. Rejecting the hierarchical and sacerdotal paradigms of the medieval church, he posited that the Bible alone constituted the ultimate arbiter of Christian doctrine, a principle later encapsulated in the Reformation tenet of sola scriptura. In seminal works such as De Civili Dominio, on civil dominion, and De Ecclesia, on the Church, Wycliffe articulated a scathing critique of papal authority, clerical wealth, and sacramental theology. Perhaps most controversial was Wycliffe's repudiation of transubstantiation, the doctrine asserting that the Eucharistic elements become the actual body and blood of Christ. Arguing that this dogma lacked scriptural substantiation, Wycliffe deemed it an aberration from early Christian praxis. His theological dissent extended beyond sacramental disputes to encompass a broader indictment of clerical corruption, castigating the clergy for their avarice and ostentation while advocating for a church modeled on apostolic poverty and moral rectitude. Integral to Wycliffe's doctrinal framework was his political philosophy, which posited that legitimate authority, whether secular or ecclesiastical, derived from moral integrity and service to the common good. This conflation of theological and political reform underscored the multidimensional nature of his critique, situating Wycliffe as both a spiritual and socio-political reformer. The Vernacular Bible, a democratization of religious knowledge. Wycliffe's enduring legacy is perhaps most vividly embodied in his advocacy for translating the Bible into the vernacular. In an era when the Latin Vulgate was monopolized by the clerical elite, Wycliffe's insistence on vernacular scripture represented a profound democratization of religious knowledge. By making the Bible accessible to lay Christians, Wycliffe undermined the ecclesiastical monopoly on scriptural interpretation and empowered individuals to engage directly with the foundational texts of their faith. The translation of the Bible into Middle English, a monumental undertaking completed by Wycliffe's followers, was both a logistical and intellectual feat lacking the technological advantages of the printing press. Each manuscript was laboriously copied by hand, reflecting the extraordinary dedication of Wycliffe's adherents. This endeavor not only facilitated wider access to biblical texts, but also catalyzed a cultural shift toward individual engagement with sacred writings, thereby eroding the interpretive hegemony of the Church. The ramifications of Wycliffe's translational enterprise extended far beyond theological discourse. By advocating for direct access to Scripture, Wycliffe fostered a sense of personal religious responsibility, presaging the cultural transformations of the Renaissance and Reformation. His vision anticipated the broader democratization of knowledge, challenging hierarchical paradigms that had long defined ecclesiastical and intellectual life. Ecclesiastical opposition and the Lollard movement. Wycliffe's theological and translational endeavors inevitably incited the ire of the Catholic Church. In 1377, Pope Gregory XI issued 5 papal bulls condemning Wycliffe's teachings as heretical and demanding his prosecution. Despite these formal denunciations, Wycliffe's association with politically influential figures, such as John of Gaunt, Duke of Lancaster, provided him with a degree of protection, enabling him to continue his reformist activities. The dissemination of Wycliffe's ideas through the Lollard movement further exacerbated tensions with the Church. This clandestine network of lay preachers and reform-minded clerics propagated Wycliffe's critiques of clerical corruption and his emphasis on personal piety. While the Lollards faced severe repression, their resilience ensured the persistence of Wycliffe's intellectual legacy, illustrating the enduring appeal of his vision for ecclesiastical and societal reform. The conflict between Wycliffe and the Church epitomized the broader challenges faced by reformist movements. His critiques, which targeted both doctrinal and structural dimensions of medieval Christianity, presaged the confrontations that would characterize subsequent reform efforts. Wycliffe's holistic challenge to ecclesiastical authority positioned him as a forerunner of the Protestant Reformation, whose leaders would similarly grapple with the entrenched power of the institutional Church. Death, posthumous condemnation, and enduring influence. John Wycliffe's death on December 31, 1384, following a stroke, did not signify the cessation of his influence. In 1415, the Council of Constance declared him a heretic, and in 1428, Pope Martin V ordered the exhumation and burning of his remains. This symbolic act of posthumous retribution, intended to suppress his legacy, paradoxically underscored the enduring potency of Wycliffe's ideas. The dispersal of Wycliffe's ashes into the river Swift became an apt metaphor for the diffusion of his teachings across Europe. Reformers such as Jan Hus drew inspiration from Wycliffe's writings, incorporating his critiques of clerical corruption and his emphasis on scriptural authority into their own theological frameworks. Hus's martyrdom in 1415 galvanized reformist movements, establishing a direct intellectual and spiritual lineage between Wycliffe and the Protestant Reformation. The posthumous condemnation of Wycliffe underscores the profound threat his ideas pose to ecclesiastical orthodoxy. Yet, these efforts to suppress his legacy inadvertently amplified his influence, ensuring that his vision of a reformed and accessible church resonated across subsequent generations. Wycliffe's enduring legacy. John Wycliffe's life and work constitute a transformative chapter in the history of Christianity. His theological innovations, incisive critiques of ecclesiastical corruption, and pioneering efforts in Bible translation established him as a foundational figure in the trajectory of Christian reform. Although he did not witness the seismic shifts of the Reformation, his ideas provided the intellectual scaffolding for these movements, shaping the contours of modern Protestantism. Wycliffe remains a symbol of intellectual courage and moral conviction, exemplifying the enduring power of ideas to challenge entrenched authority. His legacy invites continued reflection on the dynamic interplay between faith, authority, and individual agency, underscoring the transformative potential of reform in the pursuit of a more authentic and inclusive Christianity. Thanks for listening. Like, comment, and subscribe to Medieval Chronicles 1066 for more journeys back to the Middle Ages. Stay curious.